New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani is meeting with top financial executives as he tries to contain the backlash over his tax-to-rich efforts. Our very own Madison Allworth has the details for us. Madison.
Hey, Charles. Mayor Mamdani spent most of yesterday afternoon meeting with the folks who helped make New York City the financial capital of the world to try to contain that backlash that you mentioned. Mamdani met with JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon at their new headquarters in Midtown. Mamdani's office sharing with Fox Business that the pair discussed, quote, how the public and private sectors can collaborate to deliver both excellent public goods and a thriving city where all New Yorkers can succeed. From JP Morgan's perspective, they said that the meeting was constructive and included the importance of, quote, keeping the city competitive. But JP Morgan has been signaling with hiring moves that they're more optimistic about other markets. The firm has reduced their headcount in New York and now has more employees in Texas than they do in the Big Apple. Mamdani also met with Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon at Gracie Mansion. Neither the city nor Goldman Sachs has given Fox Business a readout of that meeting. These talks are the latest efforts by Mamdani to make nice with the business community as he continues to push initiatives like city-run grocery stores and massive tax increases on second homes. Mamdani has also been meeting with other Wall Street executives from Bank of America and Blackstone, the world's largest commercial real estate owner. His office has also reached out to Citadel founder Ken Griffin, whom Mamdani previously criticized publicly over his New York City penthouse with that second home tax. Citadel telling Fox Business that Griffin welcomes thoughtful, serious conversations about the policies that can grow the city's economy and create more opportunities for all New Yorkers, and that, quote, reckless political theater serves no purpose. No meeting has been announced yet. Charles.
Thank you very much, Madison Allworth. All right, for more on this, let's bring in Liz Peek, Fox News contributor. I like that last part, thoughtful and serious. I just don't take him as a serious person. I mean, he's the mayor of the largest, most powerful city in America, perhaps the world in terms of financial clout. But he's giving it all away, and I don't see what he thinks he's getting back in return.
I think he's an ideologue, Charles, and I think that really prevents him from engaging in serious and thoughtful conversation because he's made his mind up. And here's how we know that. If he were a serious person, it's one thing to expose all kinds of radical theories when you're in an Ivy League situation, right? Or the faculty lounge, as they say. But when you start running a city of 8 million people, and you roll out rent control as a great idea, there are about 100 studies showing that rent control simply doesn't work. Has he read them? Has he actually paid any attention at all to the mountain of evidence that that's a terrible idea? Right. Ditto with city-run grocery stores. I mean, you know, I don't understand how these Democrats and socialists don't get the idea that if you raise taxes, and by the way, you defund the police, which he's also doing in a subtle way, and you encourage anti-Semitism, which I think he's also doing in a subtle way, you drive people out of your city and you lose. We know that New York has lost something like $10 to $15 billion in revenues because of high net worth people leaving. So that's not very complicated. That's not rocket science. That's common sense, but he's not a common sense person. He puts ideological decision-making ahead of practical help for the city. And that's why these meetings are very nice, very cosmetic. I don't think they'll go anywhere at all.
But, you know, you mentioned, you know, do you think he's read any of these things? I think they have. I mean, not just him, but the people who voted for him. These are the highest educated folks in the world. I mean, they graduated from all these Ivy League schools. I mean, I know we've talked about this for years and how bad these schools have gotten, but it's just amazing to me when ideology supersedes common sense, as well as history.
And Charles, getting a degree from Yale or Harvard is not the same thing as being educated. Unless you have read the history of the Soviet Union, read about why Venezuela went from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the richest, I don't think you absorb the ideas that make those things true. So I don't think he's educated. I think he's kind of ignorant of history and ignorant, certainly, of economics.
Speaking of history, let's talk quickly about President Trump's trip to China. What do you make of it?
I took a very different point of view from most of the people writing about it. Everyone sort of thought it was not a very successful summit. I think it was very successful. I think President Trump did exactly what he did in 2017 when Xi came to Mar-a-Lago. Trump surprised him over a delicious piece of chocolate cake by announcing he had bombed Syria.
Right.
What did he do in Beijing that nobody really talked about or reported on? He had 30 of the world's premier business people go with him. The Chinese were not expecting that. They didn't expect him to include those people in his summit. They got behind schedule. The Chinese hate it when things are unscripted and so forth. That was Trump saying, here's what I've got, what have you got? And by the way, I think Xi was so flummoxed by the whole thing and so insecure meeting Trump because his economy is in the gutter,
right,
et cetera. When one of the photo ops, they put Trump on a smaller sofa, a smaller chair, so that Xi would look bigger. I don't think that speaks to
with
strength.
the soft cushion, and she had the bigger chair with the hard cushion.
Pretty funny.
The media was focused is sort of like on this Thucydides trap, you know, and she coming from this sort of strength, and I agree with you. But here's one of my I'm thinking. It feels like they could have a blossoming relationship. Not yet Reagan-Gorbachev, but she's coming here this year. They may be working towards something that could be monumental that I don't think President Trump's getting enough credit for.
Well, look, both countries need each other.
Right.
We need rare earths. They need the American consumer. It's really that simple. There are other supply chain items that we would like from China, but what do they need? They need to continue to export to the United States. They have not solved their essential economic problem, which is that the consumer simply is terrified in China and they don't spend.
Right.
So they need to drive their exports, which they continue to do. And the entire world now is resisting that drive. So they've got some big problems, and I think that, you know, they look to us for a solution.
And before I let you go, Kevin Walsh is going to be sworn in. Your thoughts? I mean, I wasn't really happy with Powell, particularly the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, Powell was a political actor.
Yeah.
I don't think Kevin Walsh will be. Now, of course, because yields are spiking, everyone's convinced that we will not see any rate cuts this year. Instead, now it's about 60% odds that there's going to be a rate hike. I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I think Walsh will hold his ground. He'd like, you know, yes, he's an inflation hawk, but he also thinks that productivity enhancements because of AI argue for lower rates, not higher rates. So it's all about the Strait of Hormuz and the Iran war. If they solve that problem, then I think Kevin Walsh will be on a track to maybe cut rates later in the year.
Also, he wants to measure inflation differently, and the way he wants to measure it, it's around 2.5%, not 3.2%. And he's got some amazing ideas between him, Bessent, Myron, President Trump. I'm thrilled and excited about what can happen because the Federal Reserve has not done anything, in my mind, from Main Street. And to your point, it's become so political, they're losing all of their credibility.
The main problem with the Federal Reserve is they think growth is the enemy of the economy.
Growth and higher wages,
I mean,
they hate it.
They really do it. So Kevin Walsh is a breath of fresh air. He's going to change the thinking. We need that very much.
I'm so excited. Liz,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Great seeing you.
Thanks, Charles.